The new owners of the infamous Amityville house couldn't believe their luck. It was the perfect home for their growing family, with plenty of bedrooms and a spacious yard for the kids to play in. But as soon as they moved in, strange things began to happen. At first, it was just small things, doors opening and closing on their own, strange sounds in the middle of the night. But soon, the family began to feel like they were being watched. Shadows moved across the walls, even when there was no one in the room. The air was always thick with a sense of dread. One night, the father woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of his bed. It was a man, but his features were twisted and distorted, like something out of a nightmare. The man spoke in a low, menacing voice, warning the family to leave the house immediately. But they didn't listen. They couldn't bring themselves to give up the beautiful home they had worked so hard to buy. Instead, they tried to ignore the strange occurrences, hoping they would eventually go away. But they only got worse. The walls began to ooze a thick, black liquid that smelled like rotting flesh. The family started to feel like they were being suffocated, as if something was trying to squeeze the life out of them. Finally, one day, they could take it no longer. They packed up their things and left the house, never to return. But even now, years later, they still wake up in the middle of the night, sweating and trembling, as they remember the horrors of the Amityville house. Annelise Michelle had always been a devout Catholic. But when she turned 16, something changed. She began to experience seizures and hear strange voices, telling her she was damned and needed to repent. Her family tried everything to help her, doctors, medication, even psychiatric treatment, but nothing worked. Finally, they turned to the church, believing that Annelise was possessed by a demon. The exorcism lasted for months. Annelise was tied to her bed, her body racked with convulsions as the priests tried to drive out the evil spirit. She would scream and curse, speaking in languages she had never learned. But as time went on, things began to get worse. Annelise refused to eat, saying that the demons were punishing her for her sins. Her body wasted away to nothing, and her parents watched in horror as their daughter slowly died before their eyes. When the exorcism was finally over, Annelise's body was so battered and bruised that she was almost unrecognizable. But even in death, she didn't find peace. Rumors began to spread that her body was cursed, that anyone who tried to touch it would be haunted by the demons that had possessed her. To this day, people still talk about the tragic case of Annelise Michelle. Some believe that she was truly possessed, while others see her story as a warning about the dangers of fanaticism and religious extremism. But no one can deny that hers was a life that ended in unspeakable horror. The photograph was taken in 1919, just after the end of World War I. It showed a group of RAF servicemen, all standing in a row and looking straight ahead. But when the photo was developed, they noticed something strange. In the back row, just behind one of the men, there appeared to be another figure. It was the ghostly image of a man, his face partially obscured by the hat he was wearing. It was Freddie Jackson, a mechanic who had been killed just a few days before the photo was taken. At first, the men thought it was a joke. But when they looked closer, they saw that the figure was too clear and too detailed to be a trick of the light. They realized that they had captured the ghost of their fallen comrade. From that day on, the men in the photo were haunted by the ghost of Freddie Jackson. They would see him lurking in the shadows, or catch a glimpse of him out of the corner of their eye. Some even claimed that they could hear his voice, whispering in their ear. The photo became famous, a symbol of the eerie and inexplicable phenomena that can sometimes occur in times of war. But for the men who were there that day, it was a reminder of the terrible toll that war can take, and the ghosts that it can leave behind. In 1977, a family in Enfield, England, began to experience strange and terrifying phenomena. Objects would move on their own, furniture would shake and rattle, and strange knocking and scratching sounds would echo through the house. The family tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to the creaks and groans of an old house. But things soon escalated. They saw chairs slide across the floor, and watched as their daughter's bed shook violently, as if something was trying to pull her out of it. They called the police, who witnessed some of the phenomena themselves, but they couldn't explain it, and soon called in paranormal investigators to take a closer look. What they found was shocking. The house was filled with strange and unexplainable energies, and they soon realized that they were dealing with a powerful poltergeist. The entity seemed to be focused on the young girl in the family, using her as a conduit for its terrifying powers. The family tried to leave the house, but the poltergeist seemed to follow them wherever they went. It was as if it had latched onto them, determined to torment and terrify them until they were driven to the brink of madness. In the end, the family was forced to move out of the house, leaving behind the dark and malevolent presence that had haunted them for so long. But the memory of the Enfield Poltergeist would stay with them for the rest of their lives, a reminder of the strange and inexplicable forces that can sometimes lurk just beyond our understanding. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from a friend's house. She was tired and a little bit scared, but she tried to keep her focus on the road ahead. Suddenly, she saw a figure appear in the backseat of her car. She screamed, slamming on the brakes and swerving to the side of the road. But when she turned to face the figure, it was gone. There was no one there, just an empty car and the sound of rain pounding against the roof. Sarah tried to tell herself that it was just her imagination, that she had been tired and stressed and had seen something that wasn't really there. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, following her every move. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. The car would start on its own, even when the keys were nowhere to be found. The radio would turn on, blasting static and voices that seemed to be coming from another world. And every time Sarah got behind the wheel, she felt a cold and ghostly presence in the backseat, as if someone, or something, was riding along with her. Eventually, Sarah sold the car, unable to bear the eerie and unsettling presence that seemed to haunt it. But even now, years later, she can still feel the ghostly presence in the backseat, a reminder of the terrors that can lurk just beneath the surface of the world we think we know. In the early 19th century, a family in rural Tennessee began to experience strange and terrifying phenomena. It started with strange noises, knocks and bangs and scratching sounds that seemed to come from nowhere. But things soon escalated. They heard whispers and voices in the darkness, and saw strange apparitions moving through their home. Objects would move on their own, and sometimes even levitate in the air. The family tried to ignore it, but the presence only grew stronger. They called in local authorities, who tried to investigate, but found no evidence of foul play or trickery. As time went on, the entity revealed itself to be a powerful and malevolent force. It called itself the Bell Witch, and it seemed to have a particular hatred for one member of the family, a young girl named Betsy. The Bell Witch tormented Betsy, slapping and pinching her in the darkness, and even pulling her hair. It seemed to want to drive her to madness or despair. Finally, after years of torment, the family was able to drive the Bell Witch away, using a mixture of prayers and charms. But the memory of the entity, and the fear that it could return, stayed with them for the rest of their lives. To this day, people still speak of the Bell Witch, and the strange and inexplicable forces that it represented. It serves as a reminder of the dark and mysterious powers that may lurk just beyond our understanding, waiting to strike when we least expect it. In 1947, the body of a young woman was found in a vacant lot in Los Angeles. Her name was Elizabeth Short, but she would come to be known as the Black Dahlia, due to the dark and sinister circumstances of her death. Short's body was found cut in half, drained of blood, and with a gruesome smile carved into her face. It was clear that she had been the victim of a brutal and sadistic murder. Despite an intense investigation, the killer was never caught. But rumors and legends began to swirl around the case, that Short had been involved in the Hollywood scene, that she had been involved with powerful men, that her murder was a part of a larger conspiracy. Some even claimed to have seen the ghost of the Black Dahlia, wandering the streets of Los Angeles in her torn and blood-stained dress, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. The case of the Black Dahlia remains one of the most mysterious and haunting crimes in American history. It serves as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of even the most glamorous and glittering of cities, and the horrors that may be waiting just around the corner.